Hey guys, tonight we journey back, way back, into the world of food preservation before anything remotely resembling a refrigerator, supermarket, or Best Buy date ever existed. You squat barefoot on a rocky hill, bones heavy, skin sunburned, and the distant smell of smoke clings to your tunic. You've just brought down a wild goat, and now you have a very primal problem. How do you keep this meat from rotting before it feeds your tribe? Oh, and there's no salt, no vinegar, no cute mason jars. Just you, a flint knife, the wind, and the blazing sun. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the brush with a bundle of meat slung over your shoulder, your feet crunching over dirt and dry grass. In this Stone Age reality, you're not just a hunter, you're a preservationist. You've seen what happens when meat turns. The smell alone could knock over a saber tooth. And if your tribe gets sick again, the shaman will probably blame your cursed storage instincts. Your first trick? Drying. You cut thin strips of muscle with stone tools sharper than they look, made from obsidian maybe, or flint that bites clean. You stretch the meat onto wooden racks raised just off the ground. The sun beats down, relentless, and the dry wind acts like nature's own dehydrator. It's not fast, but give it a few days, and you'll have leathery strips that chew like old sandal, but keep your belly full. This is jerky in its purest form, and it works. The sun dries the moisture, and without moisture, bacteria can't throw their little rot parties. Your tribe starts calling you meat wind, which is a name at least. But drying only works when the weather plays nice. When clouds roll in, or the rains arrive early, you have to get clever. That's where smoke comes in. You build a fire in the entrance of a shallow cave. Not too hot, just enough to make it smolder. You suspend meat on sticks over the heat, letting the smoke wrap it like a blanket. Hours pass, days even. Smoke carries phenols and acids, things you don't have words for yet, but they seep into the meat and keep bacteria at bay. Also, fun bonus, the bears hate the smell. One night, your cousin tries adding wild sage to the fire. It smells amazing. Another cousin tries moss. It smells worse. Historians still argue whether early humans discovered smoky flavor by accident or divine inspiration. But you know this, smoked meat lasts longer and tastes like triumph. And after 2 weeks of raw tubers, that's all the science you need. Still, sometimes drying and smoking won't cut it. Not when the sun's gone soft and the firewood's soaked. That's when you trek to the stream. There's a pocket of ice-cold water that trickles from beneath a hill, shaded by stone. You wedge your food under a ledge there, cool and hidden from animals. You use animal bladders or woven baskets, primitive but waterproof. This is cooling, prehistoric style. You don't call it refrigeration. You call it please don't spoil zone. But it works, at least for a few days. The cool slows bacterial growth. You've even heard of another clan that buries their food deep in snowbanks for winter storage. But last time your uncle tried it, a snow leopard got there first. You still don't talk about that dinner. One of the elders swears he once saw a bear stash fish in a glacial pool. Return a week later and eat them without dying. So naturally, you test the theory. It kind of works, except when it doesn't. You spend one winter day carving a pit into frozen ground, lining it with leaves, and storing meat in it. It's genius until thaw season. Then it's more of a meat puddle. You call it learning, but slowly, over years of bruises, moldy rabbit legs, and trial by bacteria, you and your people develop a system. Smoke when it's wet, dry when it's hot, cool when you're lucky, and when you're desperate, just eat it fast and pray to whatever stars are watching. One particularly bad season, you experiment with burying dried berries in tree bark sealed with mud. 2 moons later, they're intact. You invent the prehistoric equivalent of a granola bar. Your name gets upgraded to Berry Prophet. You can live with that. There's no written record yet, no clay tablets, no hieroglyphs, but your techniques, these trial and error marvels, will echo across generations. Drying racks made of bone and vine, stone caves layered with charcoal soot, animal stomachs used as food pouches. Each detail might feel primitive to a future archaeologist, but to you, it's life-saving ingenuity. You pass these tricks down to the kids. They mock your smoky tunic and sun-wrinkled meat. But when food is scarce, they remember. And when they become the ones hunting, skinning, and drying under that blazing sun, they whisper your name like a half-myth. You've become preservation folklore. Just try not to die from the berries again. Now you find yourself under a different sun, hotter, more golden, stretched across a land of towering pyramids and whispering reeds. You've traded your animal hide tunic for a linen wrap, your bone knife for a copper one, and the dusty stone hills of prehistory for the soft banks of the Nile. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where preserving food isn't just survival, it's ritual. You squat beside a low earthen bench, salt crystals crusting your fingers. A pile of fish lies beside you, already cleaned and sliced, their scales glinting like dull coins. You sprinkle the salt liberally, burying each piece like it's a treasure meant for the gods. Well, technically, it kind of is. Half of this batch is going to be offered to the temple, the rest sealed in clay jars for your own family's use. Salt, that coarse, sun-dried miracle from desert flats and dried-up seabeds, is the new magic. When the Nile recedes and the floodwaters leave behind more than just mud, when they leave fish flopping in puddles, you know what to do. Strip, salt, wait. The brine does the work of the gods, drawing moisture out, halting rot, and locking the food in a kind of edible stasis. One priest even claims salt has spiritual cleansing powers. He might be right, or maybe he just doesn't want to eat slimy catfish again. Historians still argue whether this salt curing originated along the Nile or came by way of Mesopotamian traders. But either way, you've mastered it. You pack salted fish into clay amphorae, seal them with beeswax, and stash them in the coolest corner of your home. 3 weeks later, still edible, still funky, still barquoise of food. But your favorite trick isn't fish, it's meat. Goat, mostly. Sometimes duck, if you're lucky. You layer the cuts with salt, herbs, and dried dates, wrap them in palm leaves, and tie them with papyrus twine. Then you bury the bundle in warm sand near your cooking fire. Not too close. You don't want to cook it. Just dry it slowly, evenly. The heat acts like a slow oven, and the salt does the rest. You dig it up days later, like a weird, delicious time capsule. Does it smell a little weird? Sure. Do you eat it anyway? Also sure. The Mesopotamians to the east are doing their own thing. You hear stories from passing traders. Sumerians storing pickled vegetables in ceramic pots, sealing them with cloth soaked in resin. Others ferment grains into sour porridge or thick beer, which lasts longer than water on a hot day. In the ziggurat towns, people even make a kind of yogurt from goat's milk, left to sit in clay jars under the sun. The first person who tried that must have been very brave or very hungry. You, however, prefer vinegar. Not that you know it as vinegar. It's sour wine that went rogue. Your cousin left a jug of date wine in the cellar too long and, bam, it turned into a sour liquid that stings the nose and makes your cheeks pucker. But when you dunk cucumbers in it, seal the jar and wait. Well, they don't go bad. They change. They sharpen. They preserve. You taste one after 5 days and your mouth burns a little, but your stomach doesn't turn. Preservation by acid. It's like discovering lightning in a jar. You tell your neighbors. They think you're mad. 2 weeks later, they're knocking on your door with jars of their own and wide eyes. The Egyptians might have perfected mummification, but you're becoming a preservationist of the living. Your granary is stacked with dried lentils and barley. Your jars are full of pickled garlic and fish paste. And your cold room, which is really just a shady corner with a damp cloth over the window, holds your experimental goat cheese bricks. One fringe discovery you're proud of: honey. It's not just food, it's preservation incarnate. You drop some dried figs into a sealed pot of thick golden honey, stash it in your storeroom, and forget about it. A season later, you crack the lid, and there they are, still soft, still sweet, like they've been time traveling. You even hear a story about a tomb opened during a desert excavation. Clay jars full of honey, thousands of years old, still unspoiled. You roll your eyes. But then again, your jar's been fine all year. The overlap between food and ritual grows. Salted meats are part of funeral feasts. Pickled onions accompany offerings to Isis. Grain stores aren't just for eating. They're taxed, traded, and sometimes stolen in quiet midnight heists. One thief is caught and forced to eat spoiled fish as punishment. He weeps. You laugh, quietly. But food preservation isn't just about technique. It's about control. It's about preparing for droughts, floods, famine years. When the Nile fails or the grain doesn't rise, the more you can store, the more power you hold. You're not just feeding your family anymore. You're feeding time itself. Your neighbors grow curious. Some start burying fruit in date syrup, hoping to slow decay. One woman tries storing bread in honey. Doesn't work. Ants get there first. You learn together. You paint a little symbol on your storage jars. 3 dots for fish, 2 for goat, 1 for do not open until next moon. Your younger cousin opens it anyway. It's fine. He learns. Probably. One day, a merchant passes through with a weird lump wrapped in linen. It's black, hard, smells like figs and tar. He says it's a date preserve from a town near the Red Sea, made by boiling fruit with seawater and honey. You trade a jar of pickled radish for it. Worth it. You chew it slowly. It's sweet, strange, oddly familiar. Preservation by boiling in sugar. It's not just a method. It's a new chapter. One that will catch on centuries from now, when some French guy in a white wig starts sealing jam jars with wax. But for now, it's just you, your jars, your goat meat, and the slow, hot breeze rising from the Nile. You squint against a sun that's far too intense for this hour, brushing a thin layer of dust from your brow. The Sahara stretches before you, endless and shimmering. Behind you, stone walls radiate heat like they're trying to cook you alive. You're in the heart of ancient North Africa, Carthage, or maybe further inland near the edges of the Sahel. Wherever you are, one thing's certain. It's hot, it's dry, and your food isn't going to survive unless you do something about it. Welcome to the world of sand, salt, and the miracle of dehydration. You sit cross-legged beside your grandmother, who's laying out strips of meat on a wide, woven mat. The meat is seasoned, coated in salt and spices, and cut thin, ready to surrender its moisture to the brutal sun. Overhead, the sky's so blue, it hurts. You place a small reed basket over the strips to keep the flies off. She nods approvingly, and you feel about 2 inches taller. This is sun drying, one of the oldest and most natural food preservation techniques in the world. And in North Africa, it's not just tradition, it's sacred knowledge passed down like songs or names. You've got dates, figs, even tomatoes, all laid out on different cloths nearby. They wrinkle, darken, concentrate, and transform. And when you bite into a sun-dried fig at dusk, it tastes like the day itself, hot, sticky, and strangely eternal. Historians still argue whether the first deliberate sun-drying practices emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Maghreb. But you're pretty sure your great-grandmother would have out-dried all of them. She dries everything: fish, goat, millet porridge cakes. She even once tried sun-drying camel milk. The results? Haunting. Meanwhile, your uncle prefers the salt curing method. You help him haul heavy blocks of salt from a nearby caravan that just returned from the mines. These aren't fancy gourmet crystals. They're raw, grayish chunks hacked straight from the earth. But oh, the things they do to meat. He packs fresh lamb into clay urns, layers it with salt, and seals the top with linen and wax. It sits for weeks. The salt pulls moisture out, hardens the surface, and kills off whatever microscopic doom would have turned that lamb into a regret sandwich. When you open it later, the smell is sharp but clean. The meat slices thin, chewy, and rich. You eat it with flatbread and pretend you're royalty. Open debate time. Did salt curing evolve here out of necessity or trade? The Sahara's natural salt pans and proximity to trans-Saharan trade routes gave access to both salt and distant foods. But historians can't quite decide whether these techniques spread from the Mediterranean or sprang up independently. Then there's chirkum, the preserved wheat and lamb dish your mother makes during festivals. The meat is cooked, dried, and stored alongside grains and spices in clay pots. It's basically a one-pot time capsule. You add water and reheat weeks later, and it still tastes like it came from the fire that morning. Let's talk fringe. There's a traveling tanner in your village who claims to preserve goat meat by rubbing it with ash from burnt olive branches. The flavor: charcoal with a hint of panic. You tried it once, and your stomach held a week-long protest. Not everything is meant to be preserved. Still, creativity thrives here. A merchant shows you how to coat dried nuts in honey and press them into tight leather pouches. The honey acts like a sealant, keeping out moisture and sealing in sweetness. You chew a piece during a desert crossing later that month and swear it gave you superpowers. Or maybe that was just heat stroke. You visit a cousin near the coast who shows off her preserved anchovies. They're layered in salt and left in clay urns to ferment under the sun. She flips the lid with pride and dares you to take a whiff. You do. You regret it immediately, but she insists they taste divine when cooked with tomatoes and cumin. You believe her. You just don't ask for seconds. Everywhere you turn, preservation isn't just smart. It's deeply regional. In the desert, it's about drying and salt. Along the coast, fermentation and oil come into play. Up in the mountains, smoking, in rare cases. But sun and salt remain the ruling forces. You wander the market, and every other stall sells something preserved. Dried apricots with rose petals, salt-cured lemons in jars, so yellow they glow, harissa, spicy chili paste, stored in oil and left to age. It's not just food. It's preparation for lean months, for travel, for life in a land that offers no guarantees. One afternoon, during a sandstorm, you huddle inside with your family and open a pot of preserved lamb and lentils. The wind howls outside, like some ancient god throwing a tantrum. But inside, the stew is hot and satisfying. You chew, you nod, and you silently thank the sun, the salt, and the generations before you who figured all this out. A quirky moment. Your little brother once tried to dry bananas by hanging them from the rafters. A mouse found them first. Now he calls it his banana trap. He's weirdly proud of that. But weird or not, the lesson sticks. Preservation is part of every breath you take here. It's why your pantry is stacked with baskets of dried okra and sealed jugs of sour milk. It's why your grandmother still checks the weather before laying out figs. And it's why, when strangers visit from colder lands, you offer them dried dates first, not because they're exotic, but because they last, like memory, like stone. When night falls and the wind dies, you climb onto the flat roof and eat a slice of honey-preserved melon under the stars. It tastes like sweetness stolen from a season long past. And for now, that's enough. You crouch near the edge of a wide, muddy river that snakes through dense, buzzing forest. The air hangs heavy with moisture, thick with the scent of crushed leaves, damp bark, and distant smoke. Welcome to early Mesoamerica. Perhaps the lowlands of the Olmec or the early Maya, long before pyramids dotted the skyline. Here, the jungle doesn't just thrive, it consumes. And if you don't learn how to preserve what you harvest, it will rot before nightfall. That's where you come in, sweating through your woven cotton tunic, your arms buried up to the elbows in fermented maize. It's sticky, sour, and suspiciously warm. Your aunt stirs the big clay basin with a carved paddle and hums an old tune, part lullaby, part warning. This is nixtamalization, a word you'll never hear, but a method you live by. You soak maize in water, mixed with lime, made by burning limestone or seashells, then let it sit until the kernels soften, swell, and give up their hard shells. It's not just about preservation. It transforms the grain, unlocking nutrition, flavor, and longevity. Later, once ground into dough, it's wrapped in leaves, dried in the sun, or even lightly roasted into thick, chewy discs that last for weeks if stored properly. You call them tamalitos, and they become a lifeline during long travels or wet seasons. Historians still argue whether the earliest Mesoamerican communities discovered nixtamalization by accident, maybe from maize soaking in mineral-rich water, or through slow, painful experimentation. All you know is, you've seen what happens when you skip the lime. The dough spoils faster, and people get sick. Coincidence? You don't think so. Today's task is prepping fish, small river catfish caught in woven traps. Your cousin slits their bellies, packs them with wild garlic and salt, then lays them flat on wooden racks above a slow, smoky fire. Smoke curls upward, wrapping the fish in preservation magic. They'll hang there all day and night, drying gradually in the warm air. You help rotate the racks, keeping flies away with palm fans. The smoke stings your eyes, but you don't stop. Smoked fish will keep for days, longer if it's stored in sealed pots with ash or fat. The jungle might devour most things, but not what you've prepared with care. And then there's fermentation, the jungle's unruly cousin. Your grandmother stores fruits, like soursop, papaya, or plantain, in hollow gourds filled with cool water and herbs. Left for days, they bubble and swell, transforming into sour, fizzy drinks that you both fear and crave. The wild yeast dances unseen, but you know it's there. You once left a gourd too long, and it exploded at your feet. Sticky fruit rain. Lesson learned. One quirky method involves wrapping meat or grain in banana leaves, then burying it in warm earth near the fire pit. It's not cooking. It's slow fermenting. After days, it emerges pungent, but preserved. You once unwrapped a packet of cassava like this, and nearly passed out from the smell. But your uncle ate 3 helpings and called it jungle cheese. You still have questions. Your favorite? Dried cacao. The beans are roasted, cracked, and left to dry on wide stone slabs. You grind them with chili and maize into a thick paste, then roll it into little balls for storage. When boiled in water, it becomes a bitter, frothy drink that wakes you faster than a snake bite. You call it chocolatl. Outsiders call it weird. Their loss. One day, a group of traders arrives. Canoes packed with obsidian, jade, and feathers. They offer you dried tamarind and smoked turkey. You trade back with your cacao balls and a jar of pickled chayote. That night, the feast is half spoiled, half preserved, and all celebration. Smoke rises, drums echo, and your belly aches in the best way. Let's not forget the clay pots, lined with beeswax. They become airtight homes for pickled vegetables, salted fruits, or even layered stews sealed in fat. You tap the lids every morning, checking for pests. Your sister once caught a monkey trying to pry one open. You named him Beans. There's an open scholarly debate over whether these jungle communities learned preservation through observation, like watching a fallen fruit ferment, or through spiritual practice. After all, so much of what you do involves ceremony, waving smoke over jars, singing to the maize, tracing glyphs in ash. Maybe it's not science or faith. Maybe it's both. A fringe trick you once saw, a wandering herbalist smearing clay over fresh meat, baking it in the sun until the outside hardened like stone. He cracked it open 2 weeks later and ate it cold. You gagged just watching. He swore by it. You swear you'll never try it. Still, it reminds you that preservation isn't about luxury here. It's survival wrapped in ingenuity. You don't have ice. You don't have fancy jars or steel knives. But you've got leaves, salt, fire, patience, and a kind of knowledge that clings tighter than vines. When the rains come and the river swells, when the air turns sour and mold creeps into the cracks, you huddle close to the fire, unwrap a smoked fish, and chew slowly. It tastes like memory, like sweat, like safety. And when your younger cousin asks how you knew it would keep, you grin and tell them, because I watched the forest try to take it, and it didn't win. You rise early, before the goats bleat, and the sun breaks open the sky. The air is crisp, dry, and smells faintly of dust and charcoal. You wrap yourself in a wool cloak and step outside your stone dwelling, nestled against a rocky slope in the highlands of early Iron Age Anatolia. Or maybe it's somewhere near the edges of the Persian plateau. Either way, the mornings here are cold, the winters are cruel, and you're about to make yogurt. Again, it begins, as it always does, with warm milk and time. You pour fresh goat's milk into a clay pot, then nestle it close to the hearth. No fire, just the soft, lingering heat from last night's embers. You check the cloth over the top, making sure the edges are sealed with wax, and not, as last week, with honey. Note to self, bees do not appreciate your culinary curiosity. By midday, the transformation begins. The milk thickens, tangles with bacteria you can't see but trust like an old friend. This is fermentation in its gentlest form. By night, you'll have yogurt, tart, cool, and ready to last days, longer than fresh milk ever would. You'll eat it plain, mix it with herbs, or dry it into brittle cakes that crumble in your hand, but rehydrate in stews, like edible memory foam. Historians still argue whether the first yogurts were accidents or acts of brilliance. Some say nomadic herders discovered it when milk stored in animal skins curdled during long travels. Others argue it was intentional, a quiet science born from observation and necessity. Either way, you now rely on it the way a merchant relies on a compass. But yogurt is only your opening act. Today, you're also drying herbs, slicing onions thin as reed paper, and threading them onto strings. They'll hang from the rafters until they crisp and curl. You pass by rows of apples sliced and laid out on woven mats, their skins slowly wrinkling in the afternoon light. Beside them, thin strips of lamb rest on flat stones, salted, rubbed with wild thyme, and gently smoked with juniper branches. It's a whole theater of preservation, each stage performing in slow motion. The most prized? Garam's funky, older cousin. You ferment fish in jars packed with salt, spices, and barley bran. After weeks in the sun, you strain the liquid off. It's brown, opaque, and smells like regret. But add a drop to a stew, and suddenly it tastes ancient and divine. You call it Murray. Outsiders call it suspicious. That's fine. More for you. A quirky neighbor swears by burying whole cabbages in sheep dung to ferment them faster. You haven't visited her since. Still, you can't deny her pickles slap. There's a scholarly debate around early Eurasian salt caves. Did people find them by accident, or were they already curing meat in them deliberately? Archaeologists have found chunks of preserved sheep legs tucked into cave shelves, like prehistoric pantries. Some theorize the cool, mineral-rich air worked better than cellars. Others think people just got lucky. You suspect both. At the communal fire pit, someone's drying yogurt into kashk, tiny white pellets that resemble hailstones. They're hard as bone, but soak into soups like magic. You suck on one out of boredom. It tastes like sour chalk and stubbornness, which, honestly, defines most of your diet here. Later, you help a neighbor jar fermented turnips. You pack them with salt and herbs, then pour in brine and weigh them down with a flat rock. He grins and tells you to wait 3 moons. You raise an eyebrow. He nods, more solemn this time. 3 moons. One traveler passing through tried preserving quail eggs in pine resin. You watched him chip one open like amber and eat it whole. The crunch? Unforgettable. The hospital visit? Equally so. But amidst the trial and error, the missteps and moldy jars, one truth rings clear. In these dry hills, food preservation isn't a novelty. It's a survival craft. You're not just fighting hunger. You're fighting time. You scrape down a clay amphora and uncover the preserved honey-cured figs you stashed 2 seasons ago. They glisten like amber in the fading sun, syrup clinging to your fingers. You pop one into your mouth. It's chewy, sweet, and so rich it hums behind your teeth. For a moment, the coming winter doesn't seem quite so long. Sometimes, during the rare market festivals, you swap your fermented cheese balls for someone else's vinegar-soaked olives, or smoked rabbit legs from a village over the ridge, or that one unforgettable time, pickled rose petals. Yes, rose petals. You still dream about them. You pass a reed-woven coop where chickens peck idly, unaware that their eggs are being buried in ash to last through the cold months. You don't tell them. They wouldn't understand. As the sun dips and the stars prick through the blue, you step inside. Your shelves are stacked with clay pots, corked gourds, wax-sealed jars, and bundles of drying plants. It smells like vinegar, time, and ancient ambition. You sip on hot broth, enriched with preserved lamb and wild barley. It warms you from tongue to toes. And in the glow of the fire, with the howling wind outside, and a belly full of things you coaxed into lasting longer than they should, you feel something strange and rare. Safe. The wind is cruel across the Mongolian steppe, slicing through your furs like a knife dipped in ice. Your horse snorts beside you, steam coiling from its nostrils like a little dragon. You pull your coat tighter and squint at the horizon. Nothing but grass and snow for miles. If you're going to survive out here, you'll need more than bravery. You'll need food that doesn't rot. Fortunately, you're a preservation prodigy. You're part of a nomadic community, and your pantry doesn't sit on a shelf. It rides on horseback, sloshes in skins, and hangs from saddles. You don't just eat to live. You plan to eat later, while galloping. First on the menu, air-dried meat, or what some tribes call borts. You slice thin strips of beef or yak, salt them lightly, and hang them from ropes strung between yurts. The wind here is your butcher, cold, dry, unrelenting. It draws the moisture out like a professional exorcist. A few days later, you're left with something hard, dark, and deceptively light. You can grind it into powder and toss it into boiling water for instant soup. Yes, nomads invented cup noodles. Sort of. Historians still argue whether borts originated on the Mongolian steppe or further west among Turkic peoples. What's agreed? It helped armies move fast and stay fed. You've heard tales of warriors surviving weeks on nothing but dried meat and fermented mare's milk. You believe it. You've tried it. It's not pleasant, but it works. Speaking of fermented milk, time to visit the bag of bubbling horror tied to your saddle. It's called Irag, and it starts with fresh mare's milk that's poured into a leather sack, stirred daily, and left to ferment into a fizzy, sour, slightly alcoholic drink. The first time you tasted it, you thought it had gone bad. Now you chase it with dried curds and feel like a god. It stores better than regular milk, and the alcohol, that's just bonus insulation. A scholarly debate simmers around these fermented drinks. Were they discovered as accidents, or were steppe cultures deliberately cultivating bacteria to achieve consistency? You lean toward the latter. Your family treats the arak bag like royalty. It has a name. It's older than you. Another quirky steppe staple, curd cakes, or aru. These chalky white lumps begin as strained yogurt, pressed into shapes, and left to dry on wooden planks. No salt, no flavorings, just sun, wind, and time. You carry a pouch of them on long rides. They're hard enough to break a tooth, but soften slowly in the mouth, releasing a sharp tang that wakes your tongue. They last for months. You've eaten one after it spent an entire winter in your coat. Still edible, still tangy, still terrifying. Then there's the cheese, biaslack, soft when fresh, crumbly when aged. You shape it into slabs, press it under stones, and dry it near the fire. Some households flavor theirs with wild onions or herbs. Others let nature do its worst and call it extra fermented. You try not to ask questions when it glows slightly in the dark. Meat, milk, and grain aren't your only tricks. You've seen people dry berries and wild onions, then mix them with animal fat into travel cakes. One old man swears by jerky dipped in rendered mutton fat, sealed in stomach lining, then buried for a week. It smells like wet boots, tastes like boot jerky. You smile politely. Your tribe also stores cooked grains pressed into tight bricks. One such creation, called Sagan Buddha, involves rice or millet boiled down to porridge, dried on flat stones and carried like edible tiles. You scrape pieces off into broth or chew them during watch duty. Flavorless, but filling. And honestly, that's half your diet. A fringe method you've encountered? Horseblood sausage. During harsh winters, elders used to draw a small amount of blood from their steeds, carefully, reverently, then mix it with grain and fat, seal it in intestines, and dry it over smoke. Rich, iron-heavy, and probably not approved by any modern veterinarian. But desperate times make delicious oddities. Preservation isn't just survival here. It's what lets your world move. You don't settle in one place, not for long. Every meal has to travel. You can't risk spoilage in the saddle or rot in the pack. That means drying, salting, fermenting, fast and often. You once tried to store a rabbit stew in a sealed clay pot under your saddle. It exploded during a hunt. You were banned from stew experiments for a moon cycle. Lesson learned. But you've also learned that the land gives what you need. Cold air replaces cellars. Smoke replaces refrigeration. Salt is a treasure, but wind is free. And the wind here works harder than most chefs. Night falls fast on the steppe. You sit in your felt-lined yurt, sipping warm broth made from borts and powdered curds. Outside, the horses murmur, and the stars stab through the black like silver teeth. You chew on a slice of dried lamb, cold and spicy, and listen to your grandmother snore by the fire. You've outrun blizzards, tracked herds across continents, and once survived a snowstorm with nothing but one flask of arag and a bag of dried cheese. You're not just a nomad, you're a preservationist with hooves. And when the storm rolls in again, and it always does, you'll be ready, with milk that doesn't spoil, meat that doesn't rot, and a stubborn will harden by years of chewing curd cakes. You wake to the clang of bronze in a bustling Mediterranean morning, sun bouncing off whitewashed walls, the scent of olives on the wind, and a nearby goat that sounds perpetually annoyed. You're not in Egypt anymore. You're on a rocky Greek hillside now, barefoot on warm stone, preparing jars of preserved olives while the Aegean Sea glitters in the distance like Poseidon's mirror. This is preservation in the age of philosophy, and while Socrates might spend his days asking annoying questions about truth, you've got more immediate concerns, like whether that jar of octopus in oil is going to ferment into brilliance or regret. Your latest batch of olives is soaking in a salt brine, simple, classic, and genius. The process takes weeks. First, you soak them in water to draw out the bitterness, changing it daily. Then salt water, then more salt, then maybe vinegar, if you're feeling experimental. They wrinkle, soften, mellow. By the end, they taste like concentrated sunlight and salt. And unlike fresh fruit, these won't rot within days. They'll last through winter. You beam with pride. You're no longer just fighting spoilage. You're crafting flavor. Your neighbor, a fisherman named Dion, has mastered a different trick. He submerges tiny anchovies in oil. Olive oil, of course, packed into amphorae, sealed with wax or clay. They last for months. You tease him, saying he's just marinating the stink. But you eat his fish every week. Historians still argue whether oil preservation was developed to extend shelf life or simply a side effect of storage habits. You don't argue. You just enjoy your preserved eggplant with garlic and oil and thank the gods for the discovery. Further west, the Romans are doing something you don't entirely trust. They call it garum, a fermented fish sauce made by layering raw fish and salt in open-air vats and letting it rot in the sun. You've passed through Roman camps before. The smell alone could knock over a marble statue, but here's the twist. It works. It works so well that jars of garum are shipped across the empire, from Iberia to Alexandria. It flavors stews, preserves meat, and is even considered medicinal. You once met a Roman soldier who claimed it cured his foot rash. You declined a taste test. One afternoon, your friend Timaeus returns from a trip to Crete with something strange, a lump of dark, sticky fruit pressed into a cloth. It's preserved figs, boiled in honey, rolled in sesame, and left to dry under the sun. You taste it. It's sweet, chewy, and addictive. You eat too much. You lie down for a bit. Preserving fruit in honey is a classic technique now. The sugar coats the fruit, drawing out water and keeping bacteria away. The Greeks might worship the body, but they're also quietly obsessed with storing treats that won't turn in a week. Then there's the fermentation crowd. Not just wine, which flows like water in your town, but pickled vegetables, fermented dairy, even strange grain pastes left to bubble and fizz in dark corners. Some of it tastes like enlightenment. Some of it tastes like bad decisions. You've been experimenting too. You bury ceramic pots filled with onions and vinegar near the base of the fig tree. You rub dried herbs into goat meat, pack it in olive oil, and hang it in a clay pantry. You try your hand at drying tomatoes in the sun. You even try to ferment milk into a soft cheese. The first batch is more slime than dairy. The second batch? A hit. Your kitchen smells like vinegar and ambition. You learn to layer techniques: salt fish first, then submerge in oil, dry fruit, then seal it with honey. You hear rumors of a Greek trader who smokes eel before drying it, then buries it in amphorae packed with sand. Supposedly, it keeps for a year. You haven't dared try it, but you respect the hustle. One day, a philosopher visits your stall in the agora. He's wearing a chiton 2 sizes too large and asks what you're doing. You explain your olive preservation method. He says, "But what is olive?" You slowly back away. Still, you think about it. Food preservation isn't just a technique anymore. It's part of culture. You preserve because it makes life stable, survivable, flavorful. But it also connects you to time, to the past harvest, to the future winter, to people far across the sea who do things differently, but for the same reasons. Your amphorae are labeled now. You've got painted seals for summer figs, Dion's fish, and don't open until solstice. You stack them in your storeroom, layered with straw, and sometimes just stand there, hands on hips, admiring your work like it's fine sculpture. Quirky moment? One time, you caught a goat licking the outside of a wax-sealed amphora. You think he could smell the honey-preserved pears inside. You now store jars on high shelves. The goat still stares at them. He's plotting. The beauty of your methods is that they're evolving. Your neighbor tries packing cherries in red wine. Another adds mustard seeds to his brine. You test fish wrapped in grape leaves and buried in ash. The results? Mixed. The satisfaction? Eternal. And when winter comes, and it always does, you open those clay jars with hands that remember the sun. You taste summer again, just for a moment, and smile. You duck beneath a low stone arch and enter the smoky warmth of a Norse longhouse. Wind howls outside, frigid, sharp, and endless. The sky is a bruised gray, and the sea beyond the fjord churns with foam and fury. Welcome to the Viking Age, where winter doesn't knock. It crashes in and moves its entire, extended family into your pantry. Preserving food here, it isn't just clever, it's survival. You stamp snow from your boots, made of stitched reindeer hide, and help your brother lift a heavy slab of salted cod onto a wooden rack. The fish is stiff, already half-dried from hanging over the hearth for 2 days. You drag it to the rafters, where smoked meats already sway gently, brushing against soot-darkened beams. Your house smells like salt, pine, and old firewood. Also, onions. Always onions. Out here in the land of sagas and ice, drying isn't just common, it's crucial. You slice fish thin, hang it outside in the icy wind, and let the Arctic air freeze-dry it until it's hard enough to bludgeon a thief. Properly dried cod or stockfish can last for months, years even. You've cracked one, open 2 winters later, and it still chews like salty jerky. Tastes like it was cooked in regret, but it's food. Historians still argue whether Norse drying methods were more refined than their Baltic neighbors, or simply a product of geography. The truth? Probably both. You take what nature gives you, wind, cold, time, and turn it into edible time capsules. One of your prized possessions, a hollowed-out log filled with layers of dried berries, beeswax, and sweet. It's part food storage, part emergency snack tube, part suspicious-looking art project. The berries were gathered in late summer, dried over stones by the fire, and packed in tight to avoid mold. The fat seals it all in. You tap the log now and then, just to be sure no mice have broken in. or elves. You're not ruling it out. Preserving meat, you've got that down to a smoky science. You salt slabs of venison, then hang them above a long, slow-burning hearth that runs day and night. Smoke clings to the meat, sinks into every fiber, and wards off the bacteria like an invisible shield. The process takes patience and a certain tolerance for smelling like a campfire for the rest of your life. Your uncle once tried to rush it. He smoked pork belly in a smaller fire pit using pine wood. It tasted like soap and sadness. Lesson learned. Not all wood is good wood. You now stick to alder, beech, or oak when you can find it. Birch in a pinch. Never pine. Fermentation? Oh yes. You've got a whole side chamber in your longhouse dedicated to it. There's a clay jar bubbling gently with cabbage and salt. What your cousin calls winter salad, though it looks more like a science experiment. There's a barrel filled with sour milk, turning into a lumpy but surprisingly nourishing drink. You call it skyer. Outsiders call it suspicious. One fringe practice you only mention after a few mugs of mead: burying meat underground. It's not for the faint of heart or nose. You dig a deep pit in the fall, line it with rocks, snow, and sometimes even seaweed, then pack salted or fermented meat in tight. Cover it. Forget about it. Then dig it up midwinter like a slightly horrifying Christmas present. The taste? Well, let's say it's acquired, but it keeps. That's the thing about Norse preservation. It's raw, brutal, and effective, and sometimes a little terrifying. But it's also deeply social. The women gather by the hearth to dry herbs, slice roots, and smoke fish. The children help pack dried fruit into linen bags, tie them tight with elk sinew, and stack them in the root cellar. You join your neighbors to butcher a boar before winter. Nothing is wasted. Meat is salted and hung, bones are boiled into fat, blood is mixed with grain and dried into cakes. Even the hooves get used. For glue, for tools, for the strange little charms your aunt hangs above the door. Open debate time. Was Viking fermentation largely intuitive, or did they pass down actual technique? Scholars argue. You just shrug and point to your crock of bubbling fish brine. It smells like an argument anyway. You've heard tales of Icelanders fermenting shark, burying it for months, letting it rot safely underground until it turns into something technically edible. You've never tried it. Not yet. You'd rather chew on dried lamb shoulder and pretend it's steak. One time, a merchant ship arrived from the British Isles, and their captain gave you a gift, a jar of honeyed nuts sealed in wax. You nearly cried. Sweet things are rare here, especially in midwinter. You learned how to make your own version, with foraged hazelnuts and wildflower honey. Your little sister called it the sun in a jar. Food preservation becomes part of your stories. You tell tales of a man who survived a blizzard by eating nothing but dried mushrooms and smoked goose, or the woman who traded a single waxed apple for 3 pairs of boots. True, who knows? But when the wind rattles the shutters and your cheeks sting from cold, you light a fire, open a jar, and share the story again. Preserving isn't just about storing calories. It's about resilience. It's how you laugh through dark months, how you save flavors from summer, how you turn danger into security. You don't just preserve food, you preserve moments. Sun-warmed berries, salt wind on fish racks, the hiss of fat on the fire, a mug of sour milk that tastes like home somehow. And when spring finally breaks through the frost and the fjord begins to thaw, you pull out your last slab of smoked venison, chew slowly, and smile. You survived the dark again. You're standing in a stone courtyard, ankle deep in olive pits and grape skins, holding a clay jar full of what might be olives or might be a mistake. Welcome to ancient Greece, where food preservation isn't just survival, it's philosophy and possibly a little chaos. The Mediterranean sun beats down on your tunic as you tip the jar slightly and sniff. Briny, earthy, pungent, not dead. Good sign. You've been curing these olives in seawater and ashes for weeks. Some folks add vinegar. Others use dry salt or oil. You just trust your instincts. And that one neighbor with the impressive beard who insists on singing to his amphorae. Because here, preservation is both science and superstition. This morning, you walked past rows of fish hanging from wooden frames by the Aegean, salted, scaled, and drying in the sea breeze like little edible scrolls. Someone told you once that fish sauce, gyros they call it, was discovered by accident when leftover anchovies rotted in a vat with salt. Now it's everywhere, poured into stews, drizzled over bread, maybe even brushed on lovers. You're not judging, but it does explain the smell. Historians still argue whether gyros was a Greek innovation or borrowed from the Phoenicians. Either way, you've seen men fight over the last drop at market stalls. One vendor claims his batches aged 3 summers under goat leather. Another says his was blessed by Apollo himself. You suspect both are lying, but it tastes decent with lentils, so you let it slide. Your own household has taken preservation to an art form. You've got figs packed in honey, smoked eels coiled in oil, and wine with enough resin in it to double as furniture polish. The Greeks may debate politics in the agora, but in the kitchen, they agree on one thing: nothing should go to waste. You press grapes in late summer, not just for wine, but for petimezi, a thick, dark syrup boiled down from must. Sweet, sticky, and shelf-stable. It's the ancient world's version of molasses. You drizzle it on barley cakes, or mix it with vinegar to make oximo, which is medicine, drink, or both, depending on your cough and how desperate you are. There's a quirky method you tried once involving preserved fish buried in sand near a fig tree. Allegedly, the roots added flavor. What you got was mildly fishy figs and one very confused gardener. You've since gone back to drying them on flat stones and calling it a day. Preserving meat is trickier in this climate. Too much heat, too much humidity, so you smoke lamb over bay laurel, stuff sausages with herbs, and pack pork in amphorae layered with fat, basically sealing it in ancient confit. A friend insists it keeps for months. You'll test that theory in winter if you survive the aroma. And then there's pickling. Vinegar reigns supreme. You pickle everything from onions to turnips to artichoke hearts. One eccentric neighbor pickles entire lemons in clay pots and swears they cure sadness. You try one. It's like chewing sunshine soaked in battery acid. Sadness remains, but your sinuses are immaculate. Bread, of course, is baked daily. Unless you're clever, you dry leftover loaves in the sun until they're rock hard, then grind them into flour for new dough, or eat them as is with wine. It's a crunchy, jaw-defying snack called paksimati, and you keep a stash for long journeys or days when your teeth need a challenge. A scholarly debate still brews around ancient storage jars, whether amphora shapes were more about transport or temperature regulation. You've hoarded enough of them to say, probably both. Tall ones for oil, squat ones for salted cheese, oddly shaped ones you pretend are decorative, but secretly hold last year's fermented cabbage. Even honey plays double duty. It sweetens, yes, but it also preserves. You submerge fruit, nuts, even bits of cooked meat in honey, sealing them away from air. The result is decadent, almost ceremonial. You once opened a jar after a year and found dates so infused with honey they practically shimmered. You ate them all, then napped for 3 hours. And wine, oh, the wine, aged in clay, flavored with herbs, thickened with resin. You pour it into goatskins for travel, sip it hot in winter, cool it in ceramic jars buried in the earth. Some evenings you mix it with seawater and call it medicinal. Some mornings you regret that decision deeply. Your city hosts a preservation festival every fall. Tables sag under salted fish, dried fruits, and strange experimental pastes that no one can identify, but everyone samples anyway. Children weave garlic strings into necklaces. Elders debate the best leaf for wrapping cheese. Someone tries fermenting lentils in a goat horn and causes a minor panic. It's a glorious mess. You once tried preserving mushrooms by burying them in barley bran, then forgot about them for a month. When you unearthed the jar, it hissed. You sealed it shut and offered it to the gods. But mostly, your methods work. You've fed a household through hard winters and droughts. You've kept soldiers marching on salted olives and vinegar wine. You've traded fig cakes for papyrus scrolls, salted sardines for bronze trinkets, honeyed almonds for secrets whispered at dusk. And when the sun dips below the olive groves and shadows stretch across the tiles, you light an oil lamp, uncork a jar of preserved quince, and spoon the golden fruit onto flatbread. You chew slowly, letting the taste unfurl across your tongue like a story that took months to finish. You may live in an age of marble and myth, of gods and philosophers, but your real power, knowing how to make summer last until spring. You wake to the smell of smoke and spices, warm, woody, and sharp enough to sting your nose. The sun creeps through latticework windows, brushing over baskets of red chilies, mustard seeds, and turmeric piled like treasure hoards. Welcome to the Indian subcontinent, sometime around the Maurya period. It's going to be a long day, and a delicious one. Your first job is turning the fish. They're laid out on bamboo mats, salted to the heavens, and slowly drying under the gaze of 1,000 crows who are frankly too bold for your taste. The air is thick with heat and the tang of brine. You've been curing this catch since yesterday. Salted fish isn't just a coastal staple, it's survival in every direction. In Kerala, you've heard they dry it with coconut husks burning underneath. In Bengal, it's smoked with mustard stalks. You mostly just pray the crows don't get it first. Preservation here is diverse, because the land is. You've got deserts to the west, jungles to the east, mountains up north, and beaches that stretch forever. So your preservation methods shift with the terrain, like a dancer adjusting steps to the beat. Take pickles. Ah, pickles. Achar, the crown jewel of your grandmother's kitchen. She has entire shelves of clay jars bubbling with chaos and confidence. Mango with fenugreek, lime with chili, garlic swimming in sesame oil, so fiery it might be weaponized. Preservation here is spicy, acidic, and profoundly personal. Historians still argue whether the earliest Indian pickles used mustard oil or sesame first, but your grandmother doesn't care. She uses both, and if you ask too many questions, she'll make you taste test the next batch blindfolded. One time, you mistook a chili pickle for tamarind. You cried. She laughed. Family tradition. These pickles are no joke. The high acidity, salt, and sunlight work together like a preservation Avengers team. The jars sit out for weeks, soaking up the heat and developing flavor profiles that could slap a grown man speechless. You've seen some that are years old, darker, denser, and nearly magical. Then there's fermentation. You help your neighbor stir the congee, a rice water drink tinted with beetroot and spiced with mustard. It's sour, tangy, faintly carbonated, and often described as an acquired taste. You've acquired it out of love and mild bullying. He swears it wards off colds and ghosts. You nod respectfully, then go back to sneaking spoonfuls when no one's looking. In colder hill regions, dairy is life. You've watched shepherds hang curds in cloth, squeeze out the whey, and press the solids into dense cakes that ferment slightly over time. The result? Chirpy. Cheese so hard you can chew it for hours. It's the original jawbreaker. A quirky method from the East. Fermented bamboo shoots. They smell like a swamp had a bad day, but they're a delicacy in places like Assam and Manipur. You've helped bury a bundle of shoots wrapped in leaves, only to unearth it weeks later to find a squishy, sour mass that somehow tastes fantastic with hot rice. Even your skeptical cousin admits it's weirdly addictive. You've also mastered sun-drying, everything from okra and bitter gourd to lentil crisps. The process is simple. Slice thin, salt heavily, spread on rooftops, and let the sun do its thing. Occasionally, you chase off goats. Frequently, you chase off children pretending to be goats. Rice, the staple of staples, gets its preservation twist too. Leftover rice is soaked in water overnight, then eaten cold the next morning with chilies and onion. It's called bakala in Odisha, poitabat in Assam. Refreshing, probiotic, and adored by people who hate wasting food. Spices themselves are their own preservers. Turmeric is antimicrobial, chili deters spoilage, and garlic scares off both bacteria and nosy neighbors. You layer your jars with spice mixes that smell so good your stomach growls just from sealing them. A scholarly debate you've heard tossed around the temple courtyard, whether Ayurvedic food practices directly shaped preservation traditions or whether they simply overlapped. You're inclined to say both. Food is medicine here, and flavor is its delivery system. You even dabble in sugar preservation. Your uncle makes maraba, fruit suspended in thick sugar syrup. Apples, amla, even rose petals are candied until they glisten like amber. It's preservation, masquerading as dessert. He claims they last for years. You claim they mysteriously vanish within weeks. One time, you helped preserve jackfruit by boiling the flesh, salting it, and drying it into rubbery strips. The result? Chewy, mildly sweet, and oddly comforting. Another neighbor presses tamarind into bricks wrapped in banana leaves. Sour, sticky time capsules that last through monsoons and heartbreaks. Storage is part of the game, too. You stack food in terracotta jars, line baskets with neem leaves, and hang bags of dried seeds from the rafters where rodents fear to tread. Your pantry looks like an herbalist's apothecary, crossed with a spice trader's dream. Even your traveling provisions are preservation genius. Flatbreads like thepla and paratha are smeared with ghee and stored in banana leaves. Laddu made from roasted grains and jaggery become edible energy balls for journeys. One time, you found a 6-week-old peanut laddu in your satchel. Still perfect. A bit linty, but perfect. At the end of the day, you sit on the terrace with a plate of lentils, a slice of pickle, and a memory of summer mangoes, now transformed into fire-breathing joy in a spoonful. You don't have a fridge. You don't need one. You have salt, sun, spice, and a family of generations whispering recipes into your bones. Here, preserving food isn't about clinging to the past. It's about turning the present into something that lasts, longer than a harvest, longer than a monsoon, longer than memory. Your boots crunch over frost-hardened ground as a raven shrieks somewhere overhead. Welcome to medieval Scandinavia, where winter isn't coming. It never left. And if you didn't preserve your food before the first snowfall, you're now extremely acquainted with the taste of bark, and possibly regret. You're in a Viking Age village by the fjord. The sun, low and lazy in the sky, barely warms your fur-lined cloak as you heft a wooden cask. Inside, fish, fermented, rank and squelching slightly, surstrumming. You've stopped asking why it smells like defeat. It just does. But it's food, and food in these parts doesn't get judged by aroma. It gets judged by whether it keeps you from starving. Preservation here isn't an option. It's a cold-blooded necessity. The sea offers its bounty, but only for a season. So you salt cod and hang it to dry on enormous wooden racks until it hardens into planks. This is stockfish, lighter than a baby, tougher than a shoe, and nutritious enough to power a longship raid. You've gnawed on it for weeks while sailing south, and you'd still rather eat it than hear another saga from Bjorn. Historians still argue whether the Vikings learned their drying methods from the Sami or developed it independently. Either way, you're just glad someone figured out that wind, salt, and patience can turn fish into survival currency. Meat follows a similar path. You hang lamb and pork in the smokehouse, low and slow, over pinewood fires. The scent curls around your beard, clings to your tunic, and makes the wolves jealous. Smoked mutton lasts all winter, if stored right, and makes even the gloomiest feast feel like a celebration. You call it fenalore. Outsiders call it a chewy test of friendship. Your personal favorite, though? Blood sausage. You mix pork blood, barley, fat, and whatever herbs you didn't lose to mold. Then boil it in a sheep's stomach. Let it cool. Let it congeal. Slice, fry, and thank the gods. A bit messy, sure. But nothing says medieval comfort food like an edible reminder of how not to waste anything ever. Quirky method? Ice cellars. Dug deep into hillsides, these are nature's refrigerators. You've lined yours with straw and slabs of last winter's ice. Inside, barrels of fermented herring, root vegetables, and what might be your uncle's questionable mead. It's chilly, dark, and a little haunted, but things stay cold. And in this land, cold is gold. Fermentation rules your diet. Cabbage gets shredded, salted, and packed into wooden vats until it bubbles and sours into something you can spoon over dried meat and call dinner. Sauerkraut may be more German by fame, but its early forms travel far across northern Europe, and your clan has embraced the funk with open arms and pinched noses. A scholarly debate still circles the longhouse fires about whether Viking ale was preserved with hops or herbs. You lean toward herbs, yarrow, sweet gale, mugwort, each one bringing its own flavor and folklore. One herb allegedly wards off trolls. You're not sure if that's true, but your cousin stopped coming around after you spiked his mead with it, so maybe. Bread isn't always soft or fresh. You bake flatbreads that are then dried until crisp, stacked in loops, and hung from ceiling beams. They last months. You break off chunks, soften them in broth, and pretend it's soup. Sometimes it is soup. Sometimes it's desperation in a bowl. But it works. Root vegetables, like turnips and carrots, are stored in pits lined with sand. You check them often. Rodents, rot, and other rude surprises love these stashes. You once found a turnip shaped exactly like your village leader's face. You gave it to him as tribute. He didn't laugh. You've seen women make cheeses aged in clay pots or wrapped in birch bark. A good wheel lasts half a year. A bad one walks itself out of the cellar. Either way, you've eaten worse. Even fruit gets its moment. Berries are mashed, boiled into syrup, or dried into leathery strips. They become tangy preserves or chewy rations. Lingonberries, especially, seem immortal. You once found a jar from 2 winters ago and lived to tell the tale. And then there's the grand finale, lutefisk, dried cod soaked in lye until it turns into gelatinous, soap-flavored mystery. You rinse it repeatedly, boil it gently, then serve it with butter, potatoes, and stoic denial. It's an acquired taste. No one knows who acquired it, but someone must have, because it's still around. Storage is just as crucial as preparation. Clay jars, wooden barrels, leather pouches, each one lined, sealed, and stashed with care. You've marked each cask with runes, mostly for tracking contents, partly to scare off thieving neighbors. One friend swears by sealing jars with pig fat. Another swears at jars sealed with pig fat. You even dry herbs and fish inside your longhouse rafters, where smoke from the hearth does double duty, flavoring and preserving even as it makes your eyes water and your clothes smell like bonfire. You've learned to love it. Sort of. Your final task today is checking the brine barrel. Inside are lamb bones, scraps of meat, and enough salt to make a goat weep. The meat is gray, squishy, and smells manageable. You fish out a chunk, boil it, taste it with a cautious grimace. Still edible. Victory. As you sit down to a humble bowl of smoked lamb, dried root mash, and tart berry jam, you feel that familiar Norse pride. You didn't just survive the cold, you outsmarted it. Here, in a world of frozen earth and hard choices, you've turned food into something that lasts, not just for yourself, but for your people. Through fire, frost, and fermented fish, you've built a pantry that defies nature. Winter can come. You're ready. Your eyes squint against the red dust swirling over the Sahel, where the wind hums low and lazy across cracked millet fields. Welcome to pre-colonial West Africa, where preservation doesn't come from ice or refrigeration, but from sun, smoke, salt, and a little bit of inherited magic. You're standing by a smoky hearth in a Fulani village, fanning flies away from strips of meat skewered on pointed sticks. The air smells like spice and charcoal. and your hands are slick with goat fat and baobab resin. This is kilishi, meat jerky that's been marinated in a paste of ground peanuts, ginger, cayenne, and a whisper of something you won't dare ask about. It's dried over a low fire, crackling gently in the heat. A single piece can last months, assuming your brother doesn't steal it first. Out here, survival is layered. The land shifts from green to gold to gray. Rains are brief and intense. Droughts are long and moody. Food must last, and flavor is never optional. Salt is power, quite literally. You've watched merchants ride out with camel caravans to Tagaza, scraping blocks of pure salt from the desert floor. Salt preserves fish from Lake Chad, sun-dried till it crackles like parchment. Salt lines the inside of your storage gourds. Salt might as well be currency. Your grandmother tells you kingdoms rose and fell over it, and you believe her. Historians still argue whether ancient salt mines in Mali and Niger predate the Sahara trade boom. But either way, you know this. No salt, no life. Smoking's your other best friend. Fish, meat, even yams, all can be smoked into something deeply savory and shelf-stable. The process is slow and meditative. You've sat in huts filled with swirling smoke, turning chunks of tilapia until they're as dry as bark and smell like they could summon ancestors. Maybe they do. You've never asked. In the markets of Kano, you've seen pyramids of dried locusts and termites, fried crisp, salted, stored in clay pots. They're protein-rich, weirdly nutty, and actually kind of delicious. A quirky preservation snack that's both food and pest control. You once ate a whole bowl before realizing they were meant for trade. Oops. Fermentation. Oh, it's everywhere. Your neighbor is stirring dawa dawa, fermented locust beans crushed into a black, sticky paste that smells like feet and tastes like umami thunder. It's the soul of your stews, preserved for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes too long. The flavor deepens with time, or possibly malevolence. There's no fermented milk, sour, cool, and served in calabashes, chilled under woven grass. You chase it with millet porridge, tangy with tamarind and ground baobab seed. You feel refreshed and a little suspicious of your stomach. Grain storage is an art form. Granaries are raised off the ground on stilts, sealed with mud and cow dung, decorated with geometric patterns. Inside, millet, sorghum, fonio, all dried to the brink and husked by hand. You stack them like edible bricks. Rainproof, rat-proof, cousin-proof. A scholarly debate echoes in your head. Did the earliest West African societies invent fermentation independently or borrow it through trade routes? Your team independent invention. You've seen too many grandmothers with too much vinegar swagger to believe otherwise. You press shea fruit pulp into little cakes, dry them under the sun, and stack them like sweets. You've helped preserve okra by slicing and stringing it like beads, leaving it to curl and darken in the heat. Dried okra makes the best soup. Sticky, earthy, filling enough to quiet an entire courtyard. Even wild fruits get their treatment. You've mashed tamarind pods, pressed them into slabs, and wrapped them in leaves. You've watched others boil soursop down to a thick syrup stored in cow horns. You once dropped one and caused a wasp incident that's still legendary. Preserving in oil is another trick. Palm oil, bright orange and viscous, coats everything from meat to pepper sauce. It acts like a sealant, keeping air out and flavor in. Your aunt once stored fried fish in palm oil for 3 months. You found it on a shelf, tasted it on a dare, and to your horror, it was amazing. And yes, there's storage tech, clay jars cooled by evaporation, woven baskets lined with sand, ash-lined pits for yams. You've even buried calabashes of dried cowpea in the shade, each one marked with a chalk rune. Only your mother understands. Quirky fringe tidbit. In some regions, people used fermented cassava that had been soaked for days until it reeked like sour socks. It was then dried into flour and stored in woven sacks. You're still unsure whether it was food or a dare disguised as cuisine. Preservation here isn't quiet or sterile. It sings, it dances, it reeks sometimes, but it's fiercely local and proudly sustainable. You reuse everything. You waste nothing. You'd rather eat fried termite stew than admit defeat to a spoiled yam. You end your day with a bowl of egusi soup, thick with smoked fish, dried okra, and a dab of that pungent dawa paste. It's bold, deep, and older than anything in your pantry. As you lick your fingers clean, you marvel at how time itself has been bent into flavor. Here, in the heart of ancient heat, where dust rides the wind and the rains arrive like moods, preservation isn't just technique, it's tradition, passed mouth to mouth, hand to hand, story to story. And tomorrow, you'll pass it on again. The waves slap gently against the side of your canoe as you glide toward the rocky shoreline of what will one day be called British Columbia. You pull in a net, heavy with Pacific salmon, each fish shimmering silver and red in the morning light. Welcome to the northwest coast of North America, where preservation isn't just survival, it's sacred ceremony. You drag the salmon ashore and start gutting it with a blade made of sharpened obsidian. Your fingers move with the practiced rhythm of someone whose ancestors have done this for thousands of years. You split the fish down the middle, remove the spine, and slice it into long, even strips. These aren't just cuts of meat. They're pages in a family story. Nearby, your cousins prepare the smokehouse. It's made of cedar planks, low and square, with a fire pit at its heart. Cedar chips are added slowly, never flames, just smoke. You hang the fish strips from crossbeams, careful to leave room for airflow. Over the next week, the smoke will kiss each piece, drying and flavoring it until it becomes hard, chewy, and deep red. This is smoked salmon, the gold of the coast. It will last all winter, feed dozens, and taste like memory. Historians still argue whether the region's complex preservation methods came entirely from within or were partially influenced by ancient coastal trade routes. You don't care. You're just glad someone figured out how to stop fish from rotting before it could make your uncle visionary again. Sun drying happens too, especially during the warm summer moons. You've watched salmon laid flat on cedar frames, facing the breeze, the sun sharpening them into leathery strips. Sometimes you chew them like jerky. Sometimes you pound them into powder, mix it with Olishan grease and dried berries, and mold it into cakes that can last months. It's called pemmican, and it travels better than any trader. The grease? That's another story. Ulichan, or candlefish, are tiny and oily, and you collect them by the basketful in spring. Then comes the gross part. You let them rot. Seriously. You store them in wooden boxes and let nature do its squishy work. After several days, or weeks, you boil the fermented fish in water until the oil floats to the top. You skim it, strain it, store it in bentwood boxes. This oil, this glistening amber elixir, becomes a staple. You dip dried fish in it, spread it on root vegetables, trade it like gold. Quirky detail? That same ulichan grease was once used as lamp fuel, hence the fish's nickname, candlefish. A fish that feeds you, preserves your food, and lights your longhouse? That's multitasking. Root vegetables, like kamas and wild onions, get slow roasted in earth ovens, pits lined with hot stones, covered with moss and bark. You steam them underground for days. They come out caramelized and soft. Then you dry them on cedar mats for long-term storage. The result is earthy, sweet, and chewy, like prehistoric granola, minus the smugness. You also harvest berries by the basket. Salal, huckleberries, thimbleberries, plump little treasures. You mash them into paste, dry them in the sun on flat cedar boards, then peel them off like fruit leather. It's tart, chewy, and addictive. You stash strips of it in cedar boxes sealed with bear fat. That's right, bear fat, effective, if not entirely vegetarian. A scholarly debate brews in the minds of anthropologists about whether the practice of rendering animal fat for preservation purposes originated from coastal traditions or interior influence. Your grandmother just says, "Fat is flavor," and passes the seal oil. Speaking of seals, yes, you hunt them, and whales, and sea lions. You cut the meat into slabs, dry it on racks, or ferment it in pits dug deep in the sand. Fermented seal meat smells like wet boots and burnt rubber, but it lasts forever and packs more protein than anything else you own. You eat it with pride, or at least with endurance. Storage methods are ingenious. Hollowed out logs, sealed bark containers, bentwood boxes, crafted without nails, soaked and shaped by fire and steam. You've watched elders tie them shut with strips of cedar bark, then smear the seams with pitch. Rodents don't stand a chance. You store dried food in canoes, lashed above the floodline, where it's safe from bears, rot, and curious toddlers. You've also seen fish cached in stone-lined pits, covered with bark and moss, marked with family crests, to avoid accidental borrowing. Cultural rituals bind the whole process. The first fish of the season is never eaten. It's returned to the river with a prayer. You carve tiny totems into storage racks to honor the spirits. You never whistle while processing food. That supposedly calls spirits, or attracts otters. You've never been sure which is worse. Fringe tidbit, some families once used urine to help cure hides and tan animal skins used in storage wraps. You didn't believe it until you caught your cousin in the act. He said it adds warmth. You said, keep it. You end your day chewing a strip of smoked salmon dipped in olichan grease, watching the sun slide behind the trees. The air smells like cedar and ash. The salmon in your pouch will feed your journey tomorrow, and the salmon on the rack will feed your grandchildren. Here, preservation is more than food safety. It's culture. It's community. It's the echo of 1,000 fires and the heartbeat of cedar forests. You're not just storing food. You're storing stories. The ground crunches under your feet as you walk across the icy plateau of what will someday be called northern Scandinavia. You're swaddled in reindeer fur, your breath forming delicate clouds in the frigid air. Welcome to the Arctic, where food preservation isn't just clever, it's your only shot at making it through the long, soul-sapping winter. You're part of a Sami community, moving in rhythm with the seasons, reindeer herds, and the whims of the snow gods. Preservation here is raw, brutal, and elegant. It uses what nature already does, frees everything, and then fine-tunes it with ritual, skill, and more than a little stubbornness. You've just finished butchering a reindeer. The meat is red, fresh, and steaming against the cold. But instead of cooking it all, you start the preservation process. You hang strips of it outside on racks. The air is so cold and dry that it freezes solid in hours. Over days, it dehydrates too. What's left is suavasbiergo, a freeze-dried meat so tough it could double as armor, but packed with enough protein to fuel a cross-tundra migration. The cold does the work of your pantry, your fridge, your smokehouse, all in one. You're grateful, even if you can't feel your toes. Historians still argue whether Arctic freeze-drying emerged independently in separate polar cultures, like the Sami, Inuit, and Evenki, or was diffused via ancient trade and contact routes. But you're less concerned with who started it, and more focused on whether you can sneak a bite before the elders catch you. Fish, especially Arctic char and trout, get similar treatment. You clean them, string them up, and hang them out in the sun and wind until they're leathery and feather-light. These dried fish, called guole, are a staple. You've even seen dogs chew on them like chew toys. And yes, you've tried one. And yes, you regretted that. Now let's talk fermentation. Oh, it gets funky up here. You've probably heard of surströmming, fermented herring from Sweden, that's so famously pungent it's banned on airlines. Your people had their own versions, long before Scandinavia had national borders. You've helped your uncle dig a hole, lower a wooden barrel filled with salted fish into the permafrost, and seal it with stones. Weeks later, you open it to a smell that could unmake civilizations. But once you get past the stench and the mild existential dread, the flavor is sour, salty, and rich with ocean umami. You eat it with flatbread and pray no one breathes in your direction for a week. Quirky tidbit: in Greenland, there's a dish called kiviak, hundreds of small seabirds stuffed into a seal skin, sewn shut, and left to ferment under a pile of rocks for months. When opened, it smells like death's forgotten laundry, but it's considered a delicacy. You once dared a cousin to eat one and lost the bet. Now you owe him a sled. Fermented milk products are also big here. You've churned reindeer milk into sour cheese, stored in birch bark tubes or carved wooden bowls. Sometimes it's mixed with wild herbs. Sometimes it's just sour, really sour. Like, did I brush my teeth with vinegar? Sour. Storage here is minimalist, but brilliant. You bury food in the permafrost, using snow-packed pits lined with animal skins. You hang dried meats in smoke-blackened wooden huts, where the cold air keeps out spoilage, and the smoke keeps away insects and curious dogs. Usually, you've also seen snow cellars, holes dug deep into the icy ground, lined with moss and reindeer hide, sealed with snow. They stay cold even in summer, and in a pinch, they double as excellent hiding spots for that dried trout you're saving from your brother. A scholarly debate rages on in archaeological circles. Did the Norse settlers in Greenland adapt Arctic food preservation from the Inuit, or did they cling too long to European methods and doom themselves to starvation? You've got opinions, especially after tasting both preserved cod and fermented whale blubber. One tastes like survival, the other tastes like regret. Smoking still plays a role too. You've helped smoke fish and meat over smoldering juniper, the smoke perfuming the meat and driving away moisture and bugs. Your great-grandfather claims juniper smoke also keeps away evil spirits. Your little sister says it just smells better than fermented seal. And speaking of seal, yes, it's eaten, all of it. You render the fat into oil, which preserves meat and acts as a fuel source. You've even tasted ice cream made from seal fat and wild berries. It was surprisingly creamy and terrifyingly rich. Dried berries are another vital winter staple. You harvest cloudberries, lingonberries, and crowberries during the brief summer burst. Then sun-dry them on flat rocks or string them into garlands hung near the fire. When rehydrated in a stew or crushed into a paste, they add a tangy brightness to otherwise beige winter meals. You once mistook dried crowberries for rabbit droppings and learned a valuable lesson about texture. Even blood is preserved. You collect reindeer blood, mix it with oats and fat, and pour it into casings to make blood sausages. These can be smoked, dried, or frozen. They're hearty, iron-rich, and surprisingly tasty. You eat them while sitting on reindeer hides, watching the northern lights swirl overhead, pretending your fingers aren't about to fall off. Preservation here is as much about rhythm as technique. You follow the herd, the seasons, the sun. You know the taste of a late frost and the danger of an early thaw. Every smoked fish, every dried reindeer strip, every jar of fermented trout is a promise that no matter how dark the nights get, you'll see the light again. So, you chew your dried meat slowly, warming it in your mouth before biting down. You sip on sour milk, dip a bit of frozen trout into seal oil, and let the cold wind ruffle your hood. Tomorrow, you'll set another fish net. Tomorrow, you'll check the snow cellar. And tomorrow, you'll eat like the North remembers. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat, your hands sticky with syrup, the smell of boiled sugar and wood smoke curling in the tropical air. The island around you hums with insect life and slow heat. You're not just preserving food now, you're inventing sweetness that will last. Tonight, you're deep in the equatorial cradle, in the jungles of what will someday be Indonesia, the Philippines, the Amazon, the Congo Basin. Regions lush and generous, but where food spoils faster than you can say, banana smoothie. And so, the clever humans of the tropics develop their own tricks. You're about to become fluent in the language of time-proofing food, Jungle Edition. First up, drying. You wouldn't think it possible in such humid places, but you've seen manioc, cassava, sliced into thin discs and laid out on raised bamboo trays above a smoky fire. The trick is airflow, patience, and just enough heat to drive out moisture without cooking the root. It hardens like ceramic, perfect for storage. Later, you'll grind it into flour or boil it into a thick, chewy porridge. With enough salt and the right leaves, it even tastes edible. Sort of. You've learned the hard way to always detox manioc first, because raw cassava contains cyanide. Yes, cyanide. Historians still argue whether early Amazonians discovered its danger through trial and error, divine luck, or by watching monkeys refuse to eat it. You suspect it was all three. Your aunt says, if it doesn't make your lips numb, you're probably fine. Comforting. Fermentation is another jungle favorite. You've helped make tape, a sweet, slightly alcoholic Indonesian dessert made by fermenting cassava or rice with powdered starter molds. You wrap it in banana leaves and leave it near the fire for a day or two. When it's ready, it's sticky, fizzy, and vaguely intoxicating. You ate 3 bundles once and woke up trying to hug a chicken. Fish. Oh yes. Where rivers are thick with life, you've watched elders pack tiny fish into clay jars with salt, wild herbs, and sometimes fruit pulp. They seal them with wax and store them underground. Weeks later, the mixture emerges as a pungent, salty paste that could flavor stew, repel insects, or end friendships. But it stores beautifully. Salt, surprisingly, is used even in places that don't have much. You've seen salt traded inland in blocks, stored in hollow gourds, even formed into coins. You helped your cousin preserve duck eggs in a thick brine once. Weeks later, the yolks gleamed golden and semi-solid, like savory jam. You eat them sliced on top of fermented rice and tell yourself this is basically brunch. There's also sugar, nature's preservative in disguise. You've pressed sugarcane into syrup, boiled it down over open flame, and watched it harden into brittle, sticky blocks. Fruits are dunked in it, then sun-dried. The result? Candied mangoes, banana chips, and tamarind balls. Your hands are always sticky, your teeth constantly under threat, but the sugar seals in the fruit's soul. No mold, no mush, just chewy, tangy treasure. Fringe fact? In some Pacific islands, entire breadfruit crops are fermented and stored underground in pits for years, yes, years, emerging as a cheesy, starchy substance used in cooking. It smells like a wet cave and tastes like, well, hope. You've tried it. Twice. You've also helped smoke meat, though it's trickier here. Smokehouses are open-sided to let air flow and reduce humidity. You've watched chicken and lizards get smoked over slow coconut husk fires. The trick is to balance the heat. Too hot and the meat cooks. Too cool and it molds. You once left a duck in too long. It became charcoal. Your uncle still teases you. Storage solutions here are part of the magic. You've packed dried roots into gourds sealed with beeswax. You've layered smoked fish in woven baskets lined with charcoal. You've buried pickled mango in clay pots beneath the coolest part of the hut. And yes, you've wrapped absolutely everything in banana leaves. If you could wrap your taxes in banana leaves, you would. Food isn't just food here. It's medicine, offering, and memory. You've prepared preservation bundles for the dry season, weddings, and even for the dead. Elder women chant over the preserved taro, placing it in graves to feed spirits on their journey. You're told that spoiled food dishonors ancestors, so no pressure. Scholarly debate swirls around the exact origins of these methods. Did fermentation arise from necessity or spiritual exploration? Were underground storage pits developed for flavor or camouflage from animals? The theories stack up like cassava cakes. What you know is this: it works. It's brilliant, and your stomach is thankful. Quirky tidbit before bed? You once saw coconut meat dried over hot stones, soaked in palm wine, and then dipped in spicy ant paste. Yes, ant paste. Crunchy, sour, and reportedly great for digestion. You took one bite, nodded politely, and then buried the rest behind a tree. A monkey found it later. Even he looked confused. Your night ends in front of a flickering fire, a bundle of sticky rice sweets in your lap. The jungle hums. The air thickens. The scent of fermented banana and roasted fish lingers like a lullaby. You feel the day's labor settle in your bones. Preservation in the tropics is constant adaptation. It's clever, it's rich, it's oddly sticky, but mostly it's a promise whispered in leaves and clay and smoke that no matter what, your food, your culture, will last through the wet, the dry, the flood, the rot. And as your eyes grow heavy, you bite into a piece of candied jackfruit, chew slowly, and know you've made it. You lie back now, the final crackle of the fire fading in your mind, the scent of smoke, salt, and sweetness still clinging faintly to your senses. The long journey across ice fields and desert dunes, through forest shadows and river-fed plains, has slowed into stillness. Every preservation trick you've met tonight, from the sun-baked slabs of jerky to the bubbling jars of fermented fish, was more than survival. It was story. In every pit of buried taro, in every smoked elk haunch, in every crust of salted breadfruit, there lived generations of quiet genius. People who tested, failed, tried again. People who learned to speak the language of rot and mold and starlight. You traveled with them, not just in time, but in skin and bone. You stirred clay pots beside Mesopotamian hearths. You huddled near snow huts under auroras. You climbed fruit trees barefoot and learned which leaves to wrap and which ones to avoid. You didn't just see history, you tasted it. So as you drift now, remember, food isn't just what fills you, it's what links you, preserved not only in jars and smoke, but in laughter, lullabies, and late-night cravings. It's the scent of home, even when home changes. Let the last bite melt slowly behind your teeth. Let the embers die gentle. Let the old world whisper you to sleep. Tomorrow, you'll wake to modern comforts, a fridge hum, maybe a toaster beep. But tonight, you rest with the ancestors. They've kept your plate full across millennia, and they're smiling, somewhere, beneath layers of time and fermented fish. Now, breathe deep. The story's done. The fire's out. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you are home.